Hi, I'm Lanny, and this is Preserving Today. Okay, today I want to show you how I'm processing my homegrown tomatoes this year. This year I grew Martino's Roma tomatoes from Baker Creek Seeds or rareseeds.com, and these were a paste tomato. So I only yielded 17 and a half pounds. And what I did is as they're growing, they're never all ripe at the same time. So as they come in, I just throw them into a Ziploc bag and put them in the freezer. This makes it easy to store them until I have all the tomatoes I'm going to have for the year, and then I can process them all at one time. I pulled all of the bags of tomatoes out from the freezer. I put them in this bus tub in my sink, and I turned on the hot water. After just a minute of them soaking, the skin of the tomatoes is starting to come off. So now it's super easy to peel the skin off, which is one of the steps of processing tomatoes that you want to do anyway. So by freezing them, this lets the skin slip off super easy, and that's a great way to do it. After slipping the skins off, I actually set those aside, and I'm going to put those on the dehydrator. Dehydrating the tomato skins and then pureeing it, I'm going to actually make a tomato powder. And this can be used in place of tomato paste in some recipes by just mixing a little bit of water with this tomato powder. Or you can just add it when you want a tomato flavor added to certain things like chili or stew or soup or whatever. If you're a person who is sensitive to nightshade plants, this might be a bad idea because I hear the skins and the seeds are kind of the most problematic part of those plants. But for us, it hasn't been a problem and it's just fine. Now, back to the tomatoes. I put all those skinned tomatoes in a big pot and I put it on the stove. And I see there's a lot of water, and I don't really want the water if I'm going to make a sauce, which at this point in processing, I still wasn't sure what I was going to do. But I know I need it pureed. So I get my stick blender out, and it's just long enough to reach to the bottom of this pot, and I pureed all those tomatoes up. Now I saw this hack on Instagram where there was an old guy processing tomatoes, and he poured his pureed tomatoes into one of those pitcher jars that's like a drink dispenser with a little spout at the bottom, like I have here. And he let it sit until the water separates from the pulp. The pulp floats to the top, and then he used that spout to pour off the tomato water. And he can make a thicker sauce. Then you're storing tomatoes. You don't need to store that added water, right? Saving space. I think he was freezing it. Typically, people cook tomato sauce for a long time to simmer or boil off that water, which is also an option. But I wanted to try this hack to see how it worked. So after pureeing my tomatoes, I put them in my pitcher. And after about 15 hours, this is what it looks like. So you can see the water is separating, but it's only about an inch of separation from the bottom. It's not even high enough to reach the spout. So I decided this was not the hack for me this year, but it was a fun experiment. And I dumped everything back into a saucepan. And good thing I did, because that time I spent overnight thinking, I decided instead of canning tomato sauce, I was going to can tomato soup. And tomato soup would be a great, ready, heat and eat meal that we could have with grilled cheese sandwiches or whatever. So I scooped out 1 cup of this tomato puree, put it into a saucepan, and I added ingredients that I wanted to flavor my sauce with. And I took note to how much I was putting into this cup. And then I could do simple math after that to know how many spices to put in each jar so that I didn't have to measure my tomato puree. Tasted it and it tastes delicious. The dog approves. So then I enlist my husband's help, and we use this strainer here. We don't have an ideal setup for this. We don't have a food mill, but we're making it work. All we're trying to do is get the seeds out. We don't want a bunch of seeds in our soup. So to do this, we're just kind of stirring this up inside of the colander to let everything through except for the seeds. Meanwhile, I am getting my jars ready, and I'm putting my spices in each jar. It's easier than having to spice the whole pot of soup. Just doing it per jar means that I have more precision of how much I'm getting in each jar. For this recipe, a half a teaspoon of garlic powder, a half a teaspoon of onion powder, a half a teaspoon of salt, an eighth a teaspoon of black pepper, half a teaspoon of balsamic vinegar, and about a teaspoon of honey. After that, I'm just ladling the hot tomato into the jar. And I do take care to stir when I get them about half full, just so those spices don't get stuck on the bottom and they get fully incorporated. Because the next step is pressure canning, and that's actually going to be like cooking the soup, and we want all those flavors to infuse nicely. I love doing pints in this canner because you can do 2 layers. I just put this little divider on, and then I could fill the rest of the jars into the top layer. I line up my lid and slide it closed and turn this to medium heat. While I'm waiting for the steam to build up, I'll show you here this book, The Prepper's Guide to Canning. This is where I got the idea for the tomato soup. I love it. In this book, they often show you the recipe per can or per jar instead of a big batch. So you can make it to scale for whatever ingredients you have. And that makes it really appealing to follow these recipes. And while I didn't do exactly their recipe, I did some of the same things, including the idea of adding balsamic vinegar, which I think was a really smart idea. You can get this book on Amazon. I'll link to it in the video description. So it's been like, 16 hours and I'm checking on these tomato skins and they are not dry enough. We want them to be completely bone dry before we process them and put them away. And I can this tomato soup for 25 minutes. After it's done and the pressure's released, I'm just going to pop the lid and vent it. And then I finished those jars on the counter for 12 hours before I wiped them down and labeled them and put them away. Okay. Now it's been 24 hours with these tomato skins and I'm checking them. They're dry now. So I'm filling them into my food processor. All of them fit in nicely and I pulse at first and then just let it run. I want to get this pretty small, like at least like chili flake size. I let it run for probably 3 to 5 minutes. When I'm done, there's not very much left. Put it into this half-pint jelly jar and it's not even full. But a little goes a long way with this and adding to seasonings. So, a teaspoon or a tablespoon here and there, that'll be enough to last the year for what I like to use with that. So this is how we processed our tomatoes this year. And hopefully next year we'll have way, way more tomatoes to process and be able to do a variety of things. But for now, tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches on our homemade sourdough with our homemade cheese is just about as good as it gets this winter. I'm Lanny, and this was Preserving Today. Don't forget to like and subscribe.